welcome to the New Churches podcast. I'm Tony Merida, and with me today is the Bryan Loritts and the Mark Lee. Great to have you guys with us today as we talk about the next essential in our series in the 9 essentials of a faithful and effective church planter. And today's especially important as we think about church planting because in this episode we're going to talk about the church. Now we all know the church can be messy, church can be difficult. I love to tell a story about my son Joshua. We adopted him from Ethiopia about 14 years ago. And first of all, we brought him home around August, September, and he immediately got to experience the holidays in rapid succession. So he gets home and he's like, different culture, but we've got Halloween, we've got Thanksgiving, and he's trick or treating, and he's like, "This is a great country." He just walk house to house, get candy. He's got eating a big turkey leg at Thanksgiving, and then Christmas rolls around, and he'd never seen Christmas. Wow. He's 5 years old, and we go up to Northern Virginia where where Kimberly's parents lived, and he's looking at the lights, he's looking at all the people, all the presents, and he's like, "Papa, are all these people our family?" And I was tempted to say in that moment, yeah, unfortunately, all these people are our family, which our family's actually fantastic. But I think some people would recognize, sometimes we have family members that are challenging. And in that moment, Joshua was recognizing that when you get adopted, you not only get a new father, but you get a new family. And sometimes the family of faith can be difficult to love. And sometimes we can be difficult to love, right? Yeah. And I know you guys have been part of the church for a long time. I mean, you're much older than I am, first of all. So you've been around the church a long time. Why do you still love the church?
Well, for me, so I grew up, for a lot of years, my father did parachurch ministry. And he was a traveling evangelist and would go from place to place. The organization he was with at the time, historically, is a college ministry. That's kind of the bread and butter of things. And where, you get 4 years with a person and then off they go. And there's wonderful things about that. The thing that I love about the church is just getting to see people in process. Again, there's turnover and people are very transient. We get all that. But to get a longer window of time, typically with people, Paul tells Timothy, he exhorts him to teach with all patience, right? And there is a measure of patience that goes into the pastoral work, and yet to be able to see where people are, to watch the Spirit of God work in them, and to see the growth over a period of time, that's one of the things that keeps me drawn to the Church of Jesus Christ. Paul tells the Colossians, I exist to take people really from immaturity to maturity in Christ in Colossians chapter 1. And I love that. Yeah. And all that comes with, and there are moments where it drives me crazy, especially during an election cycle and all that stuff. But yeah, so that's kind of, to see people in process is why.
It's a great answer.
Yeah, for me, Paul says in Ephesians that the church is the family of God. And for me, the church became my family when I had no family. So for example, like everything about my story is that my parents wanted me to get into an Ivy League college. So they were immigrants to this country. They spent all of their immigrant money sending me to the same junior high as Shirley Temple, the same high school as Madeleine Albright. All summer I didn't go to baseball camp. I went to SAT camp, all summer because my parents had one goal for me, and that was to get into an Ivy League college. And so when I got my rejection letter from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, believe it or not, my parents said, "We disown you. Wow. You are not our child anymore." Now, as a 50-year-old man, I understand that they didn't mean that at the time. They just lacked the emotional language to express their disappointment with me at the time. But as an 18-year-old child, I didn't receive it that way. I just received it at face value. So when I went to college, I wasn't a Christian, but I became a Christian my freshman year in college because I heard that I had a heavenly Father who loved me not for what I could do, but for who I was. And when I heard that, my life was completely changed. And I just grabbed a hold of the church because the church became my family at the time, because I didn't have a family. When I went into ministry, I went to the elders of this small 150-person Korean church, and I asked them to confirm my calling. They said, "We will support your education, your seminary education at Talbot, no strings. We'll pay for everything. No strings attached." So the church, I love the church for everything that it's done for me.
Oh, that's great. Yeah. That's great. Now, church planters starting out may feel like, they look at guys like you and they say, they're successful. I don't know how many challenges they've had. They may be experiencing challenges and disappointment even in their leadership and how the church is going. I think it's helpful sometimes, especially for guys starting out, to hear of our own disappointments, of some of the times, or maybe even ongoing struggles. And this just came to mind as you guys were talking. But what are some of those? For example, when someone says to you or on email, "Hey, I'm looking for other churches," does that still bother you? Or is there a point where you kind of grow beyond the struggles that you first have when you're in pastoral leadership? You spoke about the political challenges and like being patient with people, but what are some of those ongoing struggles that you continue to have to deal with as a leader, even though you've been doing this for a long time?
I mean, that's a great question. I never looked at myself kind of as a sentimental person or as a sensitive person. Until I got into church planting. And there's something about starting a church and the initial rush of we're all in the bunker together. We're pouring in, we're investing significant amounts of time. And then 6 months later, a year later, a couple years later, you get an email from one of the core members. And it's, in my case, it's an email saying, "Hey, we've made another decision, we're going somewhere else." And I'm like, "Are you kidding me right now?" Like, these are just my raw thoughts. I'm like, I invested, I spent all this time, and I'm getting an email, and you're just going to up and leave me without necessarily a whole lot of commentary explaining why. You've been sitting on this for a while. And it's not to demonize them. But that stung then, and it still stings today.
Yeah, going into ministry, we've had to do things that we never thought we'd ever have to do, like file a police report against somebody. I've had a death threat against me. Everybody on our security team had to go like, "Okay, this is the guy who threatened the pastor." Like, we never thought we would have to deal with situations like that. But I think what's harder than the email that we get from, let's say, the run-of-the-mill church person that says, "Hey, I got an email just recently. Hey, my mother's been there for 3 years. She's been sick recently. Nobody's noticed that she's missing. You don't give a darn. You don't care about my mother. Your mission statement is living proof of a loving God. Ha! Like, that's a joke." Those things still affect me because you don't know my heart. If I had known something about your mother, please, like, I would have totally have done something. But I think what's even harder than those random emails is when it comes from the inner circle. When it comes from people that you trust the most. Bryan, you said it, man. You're in the trenches with them. We have fought together. We have spilled blood together. And then for me to hear that you don't feel valued, or you don't feel, whatever the case may be, I think those are the hardest ones to deal with.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think about, was it Henry Nouwen that said a leader is a wounded healer?
Yeah.
I've always resonated with that phrase. I've never even read the book. I just like the phrase that I'm trying to heal people with the gospel, with love. And there's not a week where I'm not also wounded. And that's over 20 years now of being in this. And I still love it. I still love the church, and I love leading. I love pastoring. But it doesn't mean it's easy.
I'm thinking of Moses along these lines. Just a steady drip of grumbling, and complaining. He's catching all of that. I've often wanted to preach that passage where he strikes the rock, almost from a mental health kind of perspective, where he had just stored up and internalized all these hits over the years. And again, listen, as a leader, I do need to be admonished, and I do need to be corrected. So I'm not saying at all that we're beyond that.
Right.
But there's just something, it's almost like, I told somebody sometimes I feel like I'm the tonsils of the church. I just catch all the infection. You know what I'm saying?
Oh, totally.
I preach a sermon, it feels like, there's, a couple hundred or so people in the audience with red pens, grading me.
Yeah.
And on the flip side, I get way too much praise than what I should. But yeah, I feel all of that. Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, I think that would be encouraging to younger leaders to know that they're not alone in this.
Yeah.
And we still deal with this as guys who've been in this for a while.
Sure.
Let's think theologically just for a moment about the church. Former Major League Baseball manager Leo DeRocher quipped, "Baseball is like church. Many attend, few understand." and as a baseball guy, I know that's reality. Like a lot of people, if you don't grow up watching baseball, you got some explaining to do to someone to explain this game. The church can be like that as well. And so let me just start with a basic description or descriptions of the church, and you tell me what you would add to this as we just sort of think through who is the church, what does the church do. So the term church means from ecclesia, refers to a gathering or an assembly. But we all know that the church is more than a gathering, right? The church gathers for worship, but we scatter for witness. And we share life together for the good of one another and for the good of the world. And then the theologians often distinguish between the four senses of the church. And I think that's a helpful thing to think about when you think about church planting. You've got the universal church, that is the people of God throughout history, past, present, and future. The invisible church, all genuine believers alive on the earth as God sees it.
Yeah.
So God sees who the genuine believers are. The visible church, which are professing believers on earth, the church as we see it.
Yeah.
And we don't always see it properly, right? And then the local church, that is part of the visible church, that which we see, but in a particular location, in a particular place. Now, that's helpful, I think, because we're talking about the church planting. We're talking about planting local churches, but we have the privilege of being part of the broader church, which is a really fun discussion to have. Sometimes people, when they're talking about the church, they want to know what's essential. Because you could start in a house, you could meet under a tree, you could be, in a park. What do you have to do to actually be a church? Can you meet at a coffee shop and have a Bible study and call that church? These are big discussions, like missiologically, that people have all the time. And the reformers throughout history said that you need two things: the right preaching of the word and the administration of the sacraments or ordinances, right? Baptism and the Lord's Supper. And kind of attached to that idea of the sacraments was the idea of church discipline or church membership, that you're in good standing with your church as you take the ordinances. That's all kind of technical, kind of theological. What else would you add as someone is coming to you and saying, hey, what's foundational when it comes to the church?
And for me, can I even just affirm the question itself? Just because I think the very practical side of Mark Lee pre-COVID would have been like, well, I mean, do we really have to get that theoretical? However, COVID came along, and then all of a sudden, because of the situation, we couldn't gather together physically, and we began to ask the question, what is the church? You go overseas, you look at the persecuted underground church, and you're forced to ask that question, what is the church? Right now, even because of technology, you look at the Roblox church, the Minecraft church, the TikTok church, and it forces you to ask these questions like, what is the church at the core of it all? And I love this stuff that you brought up, Tony. And I think oftentimes we focus on Acts 1:6 and we never get to Acts 2:42, which is Acts 1:6 is then they gathered around him. Before he even gives us Acts 1:8 to go to the ends of the earth, Acts 1:6 says, then they gathered around him. And I feel like oftentimes we stop at the gathering and we don't go further than that to talk about all the different things that happened in 2:42. And I love the way that Swindoll put it this way. Many a moon ago, he said that the church is the bride of Christ, so it's the wife, And so worship, instruction, fellowship, evangelism, that's always been such a good acronym for me to go, okay, there are other elements of the church like discipline, preaching of the word, but for me, one of the things that really helps me with at the core of it all, what is the church, is that worship, instruction, fellowship, evangelism.
It's good. It's good.
Yeah, so yes, I would certainly agree on all of that. I guess what I'm wrestling with is there is the church on paper, and then there is my relationship to the church. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. So in this very consumer-driven culture, if I take my pastor hat off and I put my church member hat on, there are a lot of people who would go, yeah, I mean, I'll come to a church. I think the latest stats, 1.6 times a month. Yeah. I'll hear a word. I'll come and partake of sacraments, but there's no sense of the Acts 2:42 being that they devoted. Yeah. I think that's a key word. Yeah, sure. A lot of people want to use an argument of silence and just go, hey, there's no church membership in the Bible. And I go, I mean, it was a real assumption because you didn't have choices in Ephesus. Right. Yeah. You know, and it was inconceivable to call yourself a believer. Yeah. And to not be immersed officially within a local body. Yeah. So I don't think the argument of silence works. Yep. I would like to add the devoted piece to it. Yeah. Right?
The church culture, the community life.
Absolutely. I'm committed to this, and in a healthy way, I'm receiving the authority of the church in my life.
Yeah, exactly.
I would add those components to it.
Yeah, clearly, even though you don't see a formal membership process being explained in the New Testament, the people were clearly identifiable. Yes. And Hebrews 13, overseers are going to give an account to those that they're caring for, and they got to know who that is. There has to be some identifiable people that you're caring for, and so I think what you're hitting on is an important aspect, is that you can have a formal theology of the church, but there's also sort of the community life of the church, the devotion to one another. That you need both. You can kind of form this thing where it's highly relational, but it doesn't have any discipline. It doesn't have any accountability. You don't have a pastor that you need to meet with,
and just to add to that, so this will rub people wrong. What I feel, and I happen to be in a mega church setting. What I feel is when you have people who are coming to a church but are not officially a part of that church, they want the benefits, right? And it puts a drain on the whole system. Yeah. So you want me to drop everything and to rush and counsel you, right? But to do that, there's a sacrifice there. And I know it's a fine line, but I think that kind of consumer approach can actually serve as a detriment to my role as a pastor and other pastors in that local body.
Yeah, that's such a great point. I get this question all the time. Hey, I'm leaving your church because I don't like you anymore. And usually the reason is because what you're teaching is too shallow, or you're just not going deep enough. And I was like, oh, that's interesting, because it was deep enough a year ago, but all of a sudden it's not deep enough now. Anyway, but the idea is, hey, we're leaving the church, but I still want to be a part of your small group still. So can I do that? Yeah. And I'll say, of course you can. And they'll go, oh, that's not the answer I was expecting. And I'll go, of course you can, because I ain't putting a bouncer at the door. Right. I'm not gonna. What do you expect me to do?
Right.
I said, but that's not God's best for you. Yeah. God's best for you isn't for you to have shallow roots everywhere and, to your point, not be devoted to that one local gathering. God's best for you is for you to be plugged in so deeply to one place. Now, do you have the free will to do whatever you want? Absolutely. Am I going to stop you? No. But let me tell you what God's best for you is. This is a family. And to be devoted to one family, you're just going to have much more of a meaningful experience. The kind of experience that God wanted you to have, if you're deeply rooted in one place.
That's good. Yeah. Let's talk about, for church planters, the importance of elders, deacons, other staff you may need in your church. Mark, as church planters start the journey, can you just talk about the importance of elders?
Yeah, I think elders are so important just because I think we need oversight. left to our own devices, I think what's going to happen is that a church planter is going to lose perspective. And I think part of that perspective that they may end up losing is the perspective of maybe I just want to grow at all costs, or maybe it's the opposite perspective of we don't need to reach people at all. We just need to go deeper. And so I do think it's so important to be surrounded by wise people who can give us counsel. I think one of the things that we say at Vantage Point is that the role of our elders is to pray and shepherd the family of God. But also, I get this from Larry Osborne. Larry Osborne says that the purpose of his elders are their wise counsel, they're the breaks, and they're an emergency team in waiting. And so for me, especially when it comes to an emergency team in waiting, like I don't know about HR things. I don't know about legal issues. And so I need a group of men around me who can counsel me in ways even that I haven't been trained, that could still save the integrity of the church in a moment of crisis in particular.
Yeah, when I read, the passages on elders in the New Testament, I think one of the things that should just jump out is discernment.
Yeah.
Right? And there should be a period of time. One of the things I counsel church planters is I wouldn't want a church planter to hit the ground running day one with an elder team. Now, I know for paperwork and stuff, you got to have a board. That's a separate thing. But I think you should go through probably a several year discernment process. See, an elders with or without the title. And what you want is when you present to that local body who the elders are, there should be a sense among your church in which they feel like, what took you so long? That person's been eldering, that person's been shepherding, that person's been shaping. You know what I'm saying? And so there's a discernment piece that goes with that. I would say it's absolutely essential, but please take your time doing that. So,
what you can do, I think, immediately is teach on biblical polity, right? From your core team on. Just, hey, this is the vision. This is where we're going. Let's talk a little bit about leadership development then. Like, Mark, how should church planters think about leadership development? How soon to begin doing something on a regular rhythm? What should they be doing? Speak to that.
Yeah, I don't think it's ever too soon to start developing leaders, just because, if you want to be able to grow your church, if you want to be able to reach more people for Christ, I think there is going to be a sense in which we need to move as soon as possible from being kind of the shepherd role to a rancher role. Not that we shed this idea of caring for people or any of those things. However, I think part of the culture of the American church right now is that we just want to buy our leaders from some other place. But the problem with that is that they're so expensive, and you don't know if they even get your vision and if they're going to stick around for a while. And the best thing that you could do is that there is gold in them there hills. There are hidden talents in your own church that you don't know are there. And I think part of the difficulty for so many church planters in developing the gold and the leadership gifts that already exist in their own church is they just kind of feel like they don't know how to do it. What do I do? Where do I start? So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to focus on the things that I already know. So I'm just going to write a sermon in my study and just kind of go from there, hoping that it'll disciple people in that way. But I learned this from somebody one time. He's like, it doesn't have to be that difficult. There's crawl, walk, run. Church planter, if you feel like you don't know what to do, don't come up with curriculum yourself. Just get Oswald Sanders' spiritual leadership. Get a couple guys where you go, hey, man, I just see something in you. And I don't know if you see something in me. But if you want anything that I bring to my family or to the church or whatever, hey, I would love for you to follow in my footsteps. And can we just, for the next 6 months, maybe, go through these 6 books? Combination of maybe Christian spiritual books. I'll even intertwine some secular leadership books in there. I don't know if you guys have ever read Lincoln on Leadership. Oh my gosh, that is just absolute gold. But we'll just sit down and we'll go, okay, well, here's a spiritual book on leadership. Like, how does that apply? Where does that apply? And so I think it can be easier than people think.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think it means a lot if you go and identify them yourself and invite them in.
Yes.
And then tell them this is the schedule. You make it doable.
Yes.
You tell them be on time.
Yeah.
Let's not waste each other's time.
Yeah.
And make the plan very achievable, like you described. We're reading a chapter of a book and show up for an hour. And you'll be surprised what might happen.
Yeah.
Yeah, to continue with the baseball theme that we've been sprinkling throughout, I think every church should have its own minor league farm system where we are raising up, kind of our own talent. I think it's a telltale sign if a local body of believers' primary go-to for hiring is outside the church. Yeah. I would say that's an indicator that something could be wrong. It's not to say you can't ever hire outside. What we did at Fellowship Memphis from day one, we said the ethos of our church, we wanted to be a teaching hospital. Yeah. And there's two kinds of hospitals. One is purely service. Something's wrong, I go in, doctor works on me. Teaching hospitals intentionally say we're going to create a space for interns, for residents to practice, right? And I absolutely, I could talk about this forever. I think, Malcolm Gladwell just talks about greatness isn't so much a matter of giftedness, but, he talks about this 10,000 hour rule, right? I grew up in a small collection of small Baptist churches that created a space for guys like me at 17, 18, 19 years of age to preach. Yeah. I mean, every fifth Sunday was Youth Sunday, and they'd have a youth revival speaker or whatever. I think one of the weaknesses of the mega church movement is in our pursuit of excellence, I might even say perfection, polish, there is no longer that space that we are offering for leaders, young communicators to really cut their teeth. And so I think that's a real shame. And so I would highly encourage every church planter, day one, start a residency. And train up your leaders, create a teaching hospital. And what it did to our church was there was a deeper appreciation they had, not for the personality, but for the word and understanding we're just a part of this thing together. So I love what it did for not only the young leader who is emerging, but for our church culture as well.
And I think it's so important to be able to give church planters that kind of permission because I think they're so desperate to establish their own leadership, and they think, I'm the one who's getting paid. I should be the one teaching all the time. But wow, what a great burden that is for that church planter to have to teach 50 times a year.
Yes.
I mean, that Sunday comes along with amazing
regularity. Yes.
And so for a church planter to even have the freedom to go, I don't have to preach every single week. But if I can even go, hey guys, here's one of the things that I'm doing. We are a teaching hospital, to be able to verbalize that to the church and to go, here's the person that I'm actually training up to plant the next church. And so I'm actually training him how to preach. And so guys, can we give it up and can we support this brother right here who's our resident? I think that says a lot about the pastor, but that says a lot about establishing the culture of the church. That the culture of the church is around multiplication.
Love it.
As a young guy, I would like to be your resident. You just fired me up there, Mark. I think when I used to pastor a large church in Mississippi, no one was asking me, how many leaders are you developing? It just wasn't on the scorecard. It was, how many are here? And it was typical across, the convention. How many are you baptizing? How much are you giving? And who was tracking leadership development?
Right.
But I think if you were to just start with the New Testament as your guide for what you ought to be doing as a leader, and you come across passages like 2 Timothy 2:2, pour into other guys who will teach others also. Like that would have clearly been on Paul's job description for a pastor. And I think because we haven't measured it and celebrated it through the years, it's become devalued, and it's almost considered, I think, like as a bonus. Like this is not essential to what a pastor does. This is just, it would be great if he did it maybe, but it's not. But we've got to develop our weekly agenda as a pastor from the scriptures. And I think for me what that meant was when we started Imago Dei, it was we're going to schedule leadership development just the way we schedule staff meeting and everything else. It is a weekly priority.
Yeah.
And we've seen the fruit of that. And so whether it's one person or 10 people that you've got in your little cohort, I would just say make it a regular part of your
Yeah,
your
I mean,
life.
ultimately you measure what matters, right?
Yes.
And so we have monthly financial reports. And so one of the things that we tried to do at Vantage Point is we go, okay, well, we want to talk about people just as much as we talk about money. Because if we're talking about money more than we talk about people, then we know what matters. And so for us, what that looks like for us is that when we do our monthly financial report, we want to make sure that we do a monthly people report too.
That's good.
So on every level of leadership development, we go, okay, who's on this level and how are they trending, up or down? What are we doing to develop that person? On this level, who's trending, who's at that level, and who's right, but who should be going up? So on a monthly basis, we're looking at our resources, our human resources, and we're going, who needs more development and who needs less development? And that's been really, really good for us.
I think with this, I know, Bryan, you feel strongly about this idea of spiritual fathering, right? That yes, schedule some stuff, make it structured, but like guys also just need a spiritual dad that will just walk with them, pick up the phone and call them, speak to them. And I just really want to encourage church planters, first of all, maybe they need a spiritual father and to recognize that, but also to seek to become that.
The origins for that is kind of my own pastor. When I was a Bible college student, I interned with him, but what the internship looked like was, hey, I want you to live at my house. We're going to go on flights together. We're going to travel together. Like it was relational. And honestly, this is Jesus, right? Now, again, there's a discernment thing. You can't do that with everybody. He didn't do that with the crowds. There was the 12. And even within the 12, there was the 3. And you want to look for people who are faithful. I mean, that's 1 Timothy 2:2, as you talked about. But inviting people into your life. And that's what I did with the residents that we would have through. They would go on trips with me. They'd sit around the dinner table. For their exit interviews, when they would leave 3 years later, that was the most meaningful thing for them. Many of them came from fatherless homes. And there's a vulnerability there. They're seeing me and my wife argue at times, and they're seeing the not so glamorous side. It forces you to stop hiding behind the pulpit and to invite people into your life. But that by far is the most meaningful thing that I've done in ministry. It's not preaching a sermon. It is sharing the life of Christ in me relationally into other people.
So good, so good. When guys plant churches, immediately they're going to be doing some kind of pastoral care. Maybe it's within the core team, maybe the church launches. It doesn't take long for you to realize that you're going to have to do some pastoral care. How can guys do it well in the early stages of a church plant?
Yeah, I think it's important for guys, especially who may have come from a larger church context, to understand that shepherding is going to be the life force behind your ministry. So at a large church, what happens is that people will let you pastor them if you preach well, but at a small church, it's actually the exact opposite. People will let you pastor them. People will let you preach to them if you pastor them well. And so for me, I think this really came in where I think, Bryan, to your point, there was a gentleman at our church very early on. He was coming to me for counseling. He was driving to our church office, but before he ever got to our driveway, he stopped one driveway short. He climbed up a tower and then jumped off and took his own life. And so the police officers asked me if I wanted to go to his home and break the news to the wife. And I said, absolutely. What a privilege. What an honor that would be. I mean, that's my role as her pastor. And so I went back, and I'm the one who cried with her. I'm the one who held her hand during that time. And really, I mean, that's what Jesus has done for me. And again, Bryan, to your point, so-and-so, does she remember one sermon I ever gave? I don't know, maybe. But she will never forget that moment where I held her hand and I was with her. And so, I mean, shepherding is the life force behind our ministry. And I think the church planters who forget that are the church planters who forget the different size dynamics. At a smaller church, I mean, that's going to be so important.
Yes, that's good.
And I would also say, you've got to preach and empower a robust kind of theology of care, right? So I don't want anybody to hear this and just go, man, I got to jump at every kind of care issue.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what the small group system is for, and so on and so forth. I mean, even Mark chapter 1, it says they brought to Jesus all who were sick, and he healed the many. You know what I'm saying? So there was a point in which Jesus says, I can't do any more. So you have to put some limits on it. But another thing I found helpful as a young leader, I mean, I would walk into the hospital and just feel like I've got to have the right line, the right verse.
Yeah.
And so much of it is just sitting with people.
Yeah, absolutely.
Job's friends were at their best that
When they
first
shut up.
when they just shut up.
Yep.
And they just
Absolutely.
sat there.
Yeah.
You know, so some people, I think a lot of young leaders freak out. They got to have the right, no, just be there.
Yeah.
Just sit and just be there.
Yeah, and when you're there, questions will arise, and then you'll know what to say.
Yeah.
Like you can over prepare for that stuff.
Yeah.
Just get there.
Yeah.
And do basic things. Love them, pray for them. You know, one of the things I've learned over the years, I've when it comes to pastoring, is trying not to just be a reactive pastor to problems and situations. And I'm not saying I'm excellent at this, but we have, I think, elders on our team that are really good at it. That is being a proactive pastor.
Yep.
To where you are connecting with people, reaching out to people, praying for people when there's not a problem.
Yep.
And so often I feel like a lot of our time is given to individuals. Some of them obviously need it. They're in crisis. But there are also people that they seem to always be in need.
Yeah.
And then there are other people you look at and you're like, man, I haven't spent an hour with that person.
Yeah.
And they've been a member for 10 years and they've been wonderful, so we've done a variety of things through the years. Like we break our small groups up under certain elders and just trying to calendar a member per day of, hey, I'm going to send them a text or a phone call.
That's great.
And just ask them, how you doing? How can I pray for you? And I would just encourage planters to do that, to recognize that everybody needs you to shepherd them, even though they may not be in crisis mode. And that will go a long way. And you'll actually find out some really deep things about individuals who aren't coming to you, because a lot of people do need care and you just don't know it. Yeah. And so trying to be proactive, I think, is really important when it comes to pastoring people
and
well.
I think what's been helpful for me, too, is that in those moments of crisis, that true shepherds don't need an invite.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Oftentimes, what we will do as shepherds is we'll go, hey, can I do anything for you? I mean, the answer we're always going to get is no, I'm good. But I think the person who really cares is the person who doesn't need an invite. Just recently, I had somebody who's really important to our church. Their mom had a major stroke, went to the hospital. I said, hey, can I go to the hospital? He was like, no, you really don't have to do that. I showed up anyway.
Yeah.
And I mean, that speaks volumes when you do that.
Yeah, what I've learned is when I have this hitch in my spirit of should I or shouldn't I, the answer is yes.
Yep.
Yes.
Just do it every single time.
Yep.
And when I've not done it,
Except for when
I've
it comes
felt
to
bad.
tweeting.
That's different.
Or that text back to a staff member.
Should I or shouldn't I?
Yeah. Well, guys, this has been a really helpful discussion. We could talk a long time about the church. Grateful for your leadership, insights you've shared. And we thank you for joining this episode of the New Churches podcast. If you've been helped by the podcast, please share with a friend. And we hope you'll tune in next time as we continue this journey, as we think about the 9 essentials of a faithful and effective church planter.